I'll read the rest of Chapter 10 from our Read-Aloud book, Harriet the Spy, by Louisa Fitzhugh. The cook turned back to Harriet and heard her mutter, "Oh, you hate everybody." This was too much. Harriet ran to her room. She did not hate everybody. She did not. Everybody hated her. That's all. She crashed into her room with a bang, ran to her bed, and smashed her face down into the pillow. After she was tired of crying, she lay there and looked at the trees. She saw a bird and began to hate the bird. She saw the old drunk man and felt such a hatred for him that she almost fell off of her bed. Then she thought of them all, and she hated them, each and every one in turn. Carrie Andrews, Marion Hawthorne, Rachel Hennessy, Beth Ellen Hansen, Laura Peters, Pinky Whitehead, the new one with the purple socks, and even Sport and Janie, especially Sport and Janie. She just hated them. I hate them, she thought. She picked up her notebook. When I am big, I will be a spy. I will go to one country and I will find out its secrets. And then I will go to another country and I'll tell them and then find out their secrets. And then I'll go back to the first one and rat on the second one. And I will go to the second and rat on the first. I will be the best spy there ever was, and I will know everything. Everything. As she began to fall asleep, she thought, and then they'll all be petrified of me. Harriet was sick for 3 days. That is, she lay in her bed for 3 days. Then her mother took her to see the kindly old family doctor. He used to be a kindly old family doctor who made house calls, but now he wouldn't anymore. One day he had stamped his foot at Harriet's mother and said, "I like my office and I'm going to stay in it. I pay so much for rent on this office that if I leave it for 5 minutes, my child misses a year of school. I'm never coming out again." And from that moment on, he didn't. Harriet rather respected him for it, but his stethoscope was cold. When he had looked at Harriet all over, he said to her mother, "There isn't a blessed thing wrong with her." Harriet's mother gave her a dirty look and then sent her into the outer office. As Harriet closed the door behind her, she heard the doctor saying, "I think I know what's the matter with her. Carrie told us some long story about a notebook." Harriet stopped dead in her tracks. "That's right," she said out loud to herself. "His name is Dr. Andrews, so he's Carrie Andrews' father." She got out her notebook and wrote it down, and then she wrote, "I wonder why he doesn't cure that pimple on Carrie's nose." "Come on, young lady, we're going home." Harriet's mother took her by the hand. She looked as though she might take Harriet home and kill her. As it turned out, she didn't. When they got home, she said briskly, "All right, Harriet the Spy, come into the library and talk to me." Harriet followed her, dragging her feet. She wished she were Beth Ellen, who had never met her mother. "Now, Harriet, I hear you're keeping dossiers on everybody at school." "What's that?" Harriet had been prepared to deny everything, but this was a new one. "You keep a notebook?" "A notebook? Well, don't you?" "Why?" "Answer me, Harriet." It was serious. "Yes." "What did you put in it?" "Everything." "Well, what kind of thing?" "Just things." "Harriet Welsh, answer me. What did you write about your classmates?" "Oh, just, well, things, I think. Some nice things and mean things." "And your friends saw it?" Yes, but they shouldn't have looked. It's private. It even says private all over the front of it. Well, nevertheless, they did, right? Yes. And then what happened? Nothing. Nothing? Harriet's mother looked very skeptical. Well, my tomato sandwich disappeared. Don't you think that maybe all those mean things made them angry? Harriet considered this as though it had never entered her mind. Well, maybe, but they shouldn't have looked. It's private property. That, Harriet, is beside the point. They did. Now, why do you think they got angry? I don't know. Well, Mrs. Welsh seemed to be debating whether to say what she finally did. How did you feel when you got some of those notes? There was silence. Harriet looked at her feet. Harriet? Her mother was waiting for an answer. I think I feel sick again. I think I'll go to bed. Now, darling, you're not sick. Just think about it a moment. How did you feel? Harriet burst into tears. She ran to her mother and cried very hard. I felt awful. I felt awful, was all she could say. Her mother hugged her and kissed her a lot, and the more she hugged her, the better Harriet felt. She was still being hugged when her father came home. He hugged her too, even though he didn't know what it was all about. After that, they had dinner, and Harriet went up to bed. Before going to sleep, she wrote in her notebook. That was all very nice, but it had nothing to do with my notebook. Only old Golly understands about my notebook. I will always have a notebook. I think I will write down everything. Every single solitary thing that happens to me. She went peacefully to sleep. The next morning, the first thing she did when she woke up was to reach for her notebook and scribble furiously. When I wake up in the morning, I wish I were dead. Oof. Having disposed of that, she got up and put on the same clothes that she had on the day before. Before she went downstairs, she began to think about the fact that her room was in the attic. She wrote, They put me up here in this room because they think I'm a witch. Even as she did it, she knew perfectly well that her parents thought nothing of the kind. She slammed her notebook and ran down 3 flights of stairs, as though she had been shot out of a cannon. She hurtled into the kitchen and collided with the cook, and knocked a glass of water from her hand. Look what you've done, you maniac! What are you doing running like that? If you were my child, I'd slap you right across the face. In fact, you just watch it. I might anyway. The cook spluttered in exasperation. But Harriet was up the stairs again, out of reach. She had only descended to wrest a piece of toast from the cook, instead of having to wait for it in the dining room. She stomped to her place and sat down with a thump. Her mother looked her over. Harriet, you haven't washed, and furthermore, it seems to me that those clothes look awfully familiar. Go up and change, her mother said. Harriet was off and running again. Clackety-clack, her feet went on the parquet floor. Then thump, 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 up the carpeted stairs. She ran all the way into her little bathroom. She had a fleeting sensation of being tired as she stood over the basin washing her hands. The sun was pouring through the tiny window which overlooked the park and the river. Harriet stared, lost in a sudden dream. She turned the soap over and over in her hands and felt the warm water on her fingers as she watched a tugboat, yellow with a red sack, bob neatly up the river, the frothy V behind it curling into emptiness. A bell tinkled somewhere downstairs, and her mother called up the steps, "Harriet, You'll be late for school." Harriet suddenly woke up and saw that the soap had become a big mush in her hands. She washed it all off and then flew down the steps, drying her hands briskly on her dress as she went. Her father was at the table behind a newspaper. Her mother was behind another newspaper. The cook waddled in, muttering, "Scared the life out of me this morning. She'll kill us all someday." No one paid any attention to her. She gave Harriet a very nasty eye as she served her bacon, eggs, toast, and milk. Harriet gobbled up everything very fast and slid off the chair and was out into the hall without either her father or her mother lowering a newspaper. She grabbed up her books and her notebook. As she was flying through the door, she heard the rustle of a newspaper and her mother's voice, "Harriet, did you go to the bathroom?" All that came back to her mother was a long, distant "No!" like the howl of a tiny wind, as Harriet flew through the front door and down the front steps. Once out of the house, she slowed to a dawdle and began looking around her. "Why do I run so?" she thought. "I have only 2.5 blocks to walk." She was always early. She crossed East End at the corner of 86th and walked through the park, climbing the small hill up through the early morning, onto the esplanade, and finally sat, plunk, on a bench right by the river's edge. The sunlight coming off the river made her eyes squint. She opened her notebook and wrote, "Sometimes that house gets me. I must make a list of ways to make myself better. Number 1, stop running into the cook. Number 2, put down every single thing in this notebook. Number 3, never, never, never let anyone see it. Number 4, find out how I can really get myself up earlier in the morning so that I can get more spying done this time before school. I am so dumb and there is so much to find out that I'd better begin using all my free time spying." Just at that moment, Harriet felt someone give her a hard little clip on the shoulder. She looked up quickly, and there was Rachel Hennessy. She stood there, squinting at Harriet through her glasses. Harriet squinted back at her. "Writing again in that notebook, eh?" Rachel shot this out of her mouth like a gangster. She stood squarely on 2 feet, squinting. "So what?" Harriet's voice shook. Then she got control of herself. "So what if I am? What do you want to make of it?" Rachel turned mysterious. "You'll see. You'll see what you get, Miss Harriet the Spy." She pivoted slowly on 1 foot all the way around, and then stood squarely again, squinting. A prism of light caught her glasses, so Harriet couldn't see her eyes. Harriet felt it necessary to become menacing. She slid slowly off the bench and in 2 steps was almost nose to nose with Rachel. "Listen here, Rachel Hennessy. Just what do you mean by that?" Rachel began to get nervous. Harriet pressed her advantage. "You know, Rachel, that you're known for never meaning anything that you say. You know that, don't you?" Rachel looked completely taken aback. She stood her ground but remained silent. Only her eyes, which watered suddenly, let Harriet know that she was afraid. All of you better stop acting this way to me or you're going to get it." Harriet realized, too late, that she was getting carried away because her arms were flailing about. Something stirred deep in Rachel. Perhaps this last remark had made her see that Harriet, for all her yelling, was frightened. At any rate, suddenly she laughed in a rather spooky way, and as she did, she backed away. She continued to laugh and to back, and only when it was obvious that she was poised for instant flight did she say, "Oh, no, you don't. You're wrong there. We have a plan, and it's you who's going to get it. We have a plan. A plan!" And it echoed behind her as she ran, her heels flying up and almost touching the sash of her plaid dress. She ran so hard. Harriet stood there looking into silence. She picked up her notebook. She put it down again and looked out over the water. The sun had dimmed. It might rain. She picked up the notebook again. A plan. This is serious. They mean business. It means that they have been talking among themselves. Are they going to kill me? Is this my last view of Carl Schurz Park? Will there be nothing left here tomorrow on this bench? Will anyone remember Harriet M. Welsh? She rose stiffly and walked slowly to school. Everything looked very green and holy in that sad light before a rain. Even the good-humored man on the corner, the one with the ridiculous nose, looked sad and moody. He took out a large blue handkerchief and blew his nose. It was somehow so touching that Harriet had to look away. The door to the school was alive with clamoring children. She wished that she could wait until everyone was in, and then walk sedately alone down the corridors as though to her own execution. But if she did, she would be late. She ran towards the school. A plan. I thought that was interesting how when she was talking to that little girl with the squinting eyes, to Rachel, at different times in their conversation, sometimes Rachel was scared, sometimes Harriet was scared, or maybe they were both scared the whole time. But sometimes one of them would act really tough, and then the other one would act tough, even though Harriet was also very scared. Why do you think if Harriet is scared, she's acting that way? I wonder if Rachel was scared, and that's why she was acting that way. Or if any of the other children were scared. What do you think you would do if you found one of your classmates or your friends' journals and it had mean things written in it about you and all the other kids? Would you try to retaliate, which means to hurt that person back? What other options would you have? It's something to think about. Maybe you can write an alternate story where they find the notebook and they read all these mean things, but then they make a different choice. What else could they have done? Next, I'll read chapter 11.